Welcome to Language Matters. I'm CEO of Masterword Services, and today we have a very special guest, Avishta Seeras. Welcome. Avishta is a very well-known advocate for marginalized languages.
Well, first of all, Mila, thank you very much for having me on your podcast, Language Matters. It's always a pleasure to share a space with you and learn from you. And I appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this podcast. So my name is Avishta Seeras. I was born in Mauritius. I've been living in Canada for over 15 years now. And I've become, in at least the last, I want to say, 3 or 4 years, I've become a language advocate. And I specifically advocate for, as you say, marginalized languages. I use different terms for these languages as well, minority, lesser known, less spoken languages. And I'm a speaker of one of those languages. I'm a speaker of Kreol Morisien, or Mauritian Creole in English. And at least I used to be an avid language learner. I've taken a hiatus right now because I'm focusing on other projects. But I do enjoy learning languages, and my passion came from learning languages. I decided, to take it a step further and start advocating for languages as well. And it sort of all started because I realized the lack of awareness of the thousands. We have over 7,000 languages that are still spoken in the world today. And most people are aware of the dominant ones. I would say there's about 11 of them that we continuously see in the polyglot community where people are only learning those ones. So this is all of these like little challenges that I saw that, people face when learning languages, but also the lack of awareness around the other ones that exist that people can learn. That sort of encouraged me to work in language and cultural advocacy. So yeah,
Well, that's excellent. You have put on an amazing event, Lingua Cultura, with very large linguistic participation and very few resources behind organizing it. So tell us a little bit about the event, and I think you just had one in June, right?
That's correct. Yes. So the events that I produce are focused on language and culture. The topics are focused more specifically on language, culture, and identity, and also power relations between languages. And I recently did the second Lingua Cultura Experience Conference this year, which was in June. Last year was in June as well. And so this year's conference was focused on Indigenous languages, but also Creole languages. So Indigenous and Creole languages and cultures. And the reason why I decided to have this specific theme this year is because to align with the International Decade of Indigenous Languages, which started this year. It's going to go until 2032. So I thought this is a perfect occasion for me to do another big conference this year and have it focus specifically on Indigenous languages and support the global action plan for the decade. And then I also saw an opportunity for me to bring awareness to Creole languages that are not very known. Even in the language world, lots of people don't know about Creole languages. I would say the only one that we hear the most of is Haitian Creole, or Kreol Morisien. And when I started seeing all these, like, as I mentioned earlier, I started seeing all these like little things that were kind of bugging me, that people didn't know about my language, and they didn't know about this entire group of language called Creole language, like the Creole language family. I realized, I can create an event around bringing out awareness to Creole languages by bringing speakers of these languages to talk about their languages and also in their languages. So that's a big part of the events that I do. I really encourage people to use their languages, whether it's English or other languages, to use all of their languages during these sessions. And I know when you think about this, this is sort of a challenging, endeavor for people. And some of the speakers do sort of struggle with this idea. But others really embrace it because I'm creating a multilingual and multicultural space for them to be able to share about their culture and share about their language in their own language. So I encourage people to have bilingual or multilingual sessions by providing their content in both their languages and also in English.
So, Avishta, I wanted to ask you, why should anybody care about these languages? Let's say I'm a big corporation or I'm a school system. Why do I want to think about Creole languages and promote them, right? Versus, let's say, publishing all of my materials in French.
Well, it's because even though English is the global language of communication, and there are, you can get pretty easy access to information in all the dominant languages. But if you look at the case of Africa, for example, which is where I'm from, you find that there are lots of communities out there that are still just using their indigenous languages to communicate, and they want content, they want information, whether it's legal information or medical information. They need all of that to be in their own language. We shouldn't have to push the education of colonial languages over people's mother tongues. People should have access to content, to information in their own languages, because if you look at there's lots of tribes in Africa, and I've heard this firsthand from people being in different conversations. I talk a lot about Africa because at least in the last few months, I've heard a lot of directly from speakers of African indigenous languages, and they tell you that they would much rather have content in their own language than have to learn the colonial language and consume that information in their language. So you show them great support, and you show them that you respect them, that you value them in their languages when you are providing content. You're going the extra mile to not only translate the content in other languages that are available in their country, but also in their mother tongue. And this is very, very important to these communities because it's this is the primary language for them. That you don't want to have to force another language on someone just so that they can consume important, vital information for their survival in some cases in other languages. So this is why this is why it's important for us to, as much as possible, if for companies, if they want to reach those communities, is to provide the content in those languages. And in Africa, for example, you have various colonial languages that are being spoken still, English, French, Portuguese, and primarily you'll have all those official content being distributed in those languages, but not necessarily in all the indigenous languages that are spoken in those countries. So this is why I think it's important that we show them the
concept, or actually maybe even a new term to some of our listeners, because not many of us hear the word colonial language. So it's not only the I guess economic and geographic expansion, and the term of colonialism also applies linguistically, and it's a new concept, and I want for people to kind of pay attention to that because it's also important. But even coming into this country, how what is your language to you as a speaker of a marginalized language? What does your language represent to you?
As someone who's been living in the diaspora for a long time, first and foremost, my language is my identity, my way to connect with what I guess I used to call home. I guess I call Canada home now because that's where my family is. But it's a way to stay connected to my roots, to the traditions that we used to follow and still do here. Lots of practices, cultural practices, are done in the language that in your mother tongue. And it's sort of it's kind of hard for me to be able to, let's say, practice to celebrate Diwali, for example, which is a big part of my culture as a Hindu. And if I'm not actually using the language that I learned and used to practice this celebration in. So this is what this being able to communicate in my language, while being far, far away from home, is my way of staying connected to my identity as a Mauritian, and also to stay connected to my culture, whether it's through music or through just understanding how the language also has evolved in the last 15 years of me not being there, learning the new slangs and all that. It's always fascinating because, at least in my case, when I left the country, we didn't have a written script for the language, and now there is a written script for it. You can actually learn how to write in Kreol Morisien, which is not something that I've learned before. So I'm in the process of actually learning how to write in my own language now, so that I can actually advocate better for the language, but also to stay connected to it. Even though I would say here, there isn't really any reason why I would need to use Creole here in Canada, other than in social gatherings within the Mauritian community here in my city. But I still want that ability to be able to write someday, to write my thoughts directly, in Mauritian Creole. So this is what my language means to me. My ability to connect to my country, to my people, to my identity as a Mauritian.
That's incredible. That's very, very powerful. Want to ask you, as interpreters and translators, what can we do to support what can we do to support raising awareness about the importance of marginalized languages, and what can we do to make a difference?
I believe that language professionals who work with marginalized languages, especially when those languages are not their primary languages, they show great respect for both the language and also for the speakers. As I know, achieving a C1 or C2 level in any language is a very arduous process. So, being able to achieve that level of, to be a translator or an interpreter, that means you have a very high level of proficiency in the language. So when you do that, you're showing the people that they're valued, and that you not only value their languages, but you also value them as people. And other ways that I think interpreters, translators, educators especially can help speakers of those marginalized languages is by creating content and creating resources in those languages and making them accessible to those marginalized speakers, to making sure that those languages survive, not only within those those communities of speakers of marginalized languages, but also on various online platforms, so that if you have language learners out there who want to study those marginalized languages, they do have access to these resources and they can study them and actually prolong the survival of these marginalized languages. So I believe that's how we as language professionals, we can help them. And also by creating awareness, just having conversations like this, having spaces where we can talk about these languages and invite people whose first language is a marginalized language, and just letting them, sharing their experience with their language and why it is that we should learn their language as well. So these types of spaces are very, very important to creating awareness, but also empowering these speakers to continue learning their own languages and passing it on to future generations. Yeah.
And I think that actually even the word itself, marginalized language, language of limited diffusion, is rather deceptive, because we're talking about how many speakers of the language they are, and for some languages, for example, Fulani, we have 70 million speakers who are speaking that language, while for other languages it may be 1 or 2 million people. And but what's important to understand for our speakers that today, 40% of the world cannot have access to education in their native language. And because of that, children and people are forced to learn both new subject and new language at the same time, which actually results in an incredibly high failure rate or no education at all. And according to some of the statistics, about 170 million people feed into extreme poverty, not even poverty, but extreme poverty as a result of that. So having information available in multiple languages or marginalized languages, languages of limited diffusion, actually allows access to the same opportunities we have for millions of people in the world, or hundreds of millions of people in the world. We've also heard next 1 billion users, right? That term we hear it sometimes. So we're talking about a huge change that can affect the world. And we as language professionals can make a big difference. And Avishta, you're one of these people making a big difference, raising awareness, getting people involved. So we want to really thank you for doing that. We look forward to Lingua Cultura event again next year. And thank you for what you do, and thank you for being a part of Language Matters.
Well, thank you very much, Mila, to you and also your team for putting this together and inviting me to be a part of Language Matters. And I do hope, as you mentioned, I hope that there's going to be a Lingua Cultura experience next year as well. It all depends on whether, on whether we have a budget and also a team, as the lack of resources is a big sort of deterrent to doing these free events. But yeah, I'm really, really hoping to bring Lingua Cultura experience again next year. And I hope to create spaces for even more of those marginalized languages to be represented at those events. Thank you very much, Mila.
We'll be sharing how to get in touch with you for those of our listeners who want to get involved and who want to volunteer and participate in the next year's event.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.